Well, good morning. I'm Michael Spagnuolo. I'm one of FEMA's liaisons to the National Hurricane Center. As you heard in a presentation this morning, FEMA spends a lot of money based on the forecasts that come out of the National Hurricane Center, but they care so much about those forecasts that they spend money to have their personnel housed at different NOAA facilities across the country. FEMA and NOAA have a cadre of liaisons they send back and forth. Both myself and Matthew Green are at the National Hurricane Center here in Miami. We have Whitney Flynn and soon to be a deputy at the National Water Center in Tuscaloosa. We have Summer Erickson at the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma. And then up at FEMA headquarters, NOAA through the National Operations Center sends over a liaison to staff the National Response Coordination Center and also support the incident management teams that may deploy out into the field. So the Hurricane Liaison team started in the 90s. It was solidified after the 1996 season at a request from the Florida governor. And since there's been full-time positions at the National Hurricane Center. So again, Matthew and I are FEMA employees with the Department of Homeland Security, but we are housed in the National Hurricane Center. Matthew and I are just a small part of what we kind of consider to be the Hurricane Liaison team. We also have regional counterparts. If you're not aware, FEMA splits the United States up into 10 different regions, and they have regional offices with regional staff to help facilitate that response recovery effort down to the state and local level. So all of the coastal regions that are at risk of tropical cyclones have a regional hurricane program manager that during a threat to their region may deploy down to the National Hurricane Center. Matthew and I are pretty good awareness on the down to the state and local level as to sort of what's going on, but to keep up with those contacts and know the intricacies of each individual states and especially the local level plans for evacuations, we rely on the regional folks to have that expertise. They're the technical experts for their specific region. So the Hurricane Liaison team, again, Matthew and I, while we have a meteorology background, all of our experience in the professional world is within emergency management. So we are not forecasters. We are not making the forecast. That, of course, is being done by the National Hurricane Center. But we are the emergency management experts and point of contact in the room. We are there to facilitate the flow of information between the emergency management community and the decision makers and the forecasters. So that goes both ways. It's for the emergency managers, of course, to ask questions about the forecast, to get briefings from the forecasters at the Hurricane Center, to maybe have discussions with the storm surge unit. But it's also so that the Hurricane Center has visibility on the protective actions being taken by the emergency management community. It's important for the storm surge unit they've put out their storm surge forecast, and they need to make sure that the appropriate decisions are being made based on that, of course, most importantly with the evacuations. So like many in the emergency management community, we have sort of different activation levels that we go through. Throughout a lot of the season, we'll spend time at our level 3, kind of an enhanced state, sending some email reports, doing our regular briefings to U.S. interests from a tropical system. We'll get into our heightened phase at level 2. That typically involves more direct coordination with the states, the territories, and the tribal partners. So we're maybe briefing directly with them. And then we may be having our regional program managers deploy down. And of course, for something like a major hurricane landfall, we'll be doing 24/7 around-the-clock support. And we may even deploy down some reservists that we have to help beef up our staffing. So this is our office at the National Hurricane Center. These are some pictures from Hurricane Ian. In our TV studio room, which is the left picture, in that room is where we can brief our federal partners on our video teleconference system. So that can go all the way up to the president at the White House has been briefed on the screens in that room. But in this picture, we're doing a briefing. John Cangelosi and Dr. Fritz are briefing the state of Florida and all of their counties. So Lee County Emergency Management was on this call. All the county emergency managers get on this call a couple times a day when there's a threat to Florida. They're hearing the latest forecast advisory package. For Hurricane Ian, we also had the FEMA administrator and the chief of staff to come down to the Hurricane Center for a day or two before landfall, when we were really in that preparedness phase to help facilitate those big arm movements that FEMA was taking in the preparedness side. And then on the right, our IT specialist and myself were preparing a slide deck that was going to be presented at an interagency call at 12:30. So Dr. Brennan was about to brief some of the FEMA leadership at headquarters. This is how this season looked in terms of our operational scale. I failed to mention at the start, Vic DeJesus is our lead for the HLT Pacific. Of course, anywhere that there's U.S. territory, FEMA is the lead response and recovery agencies. So that includes into the West and South Pacific. And our season started early this year with Typhoon Maywar impacting Guam and the Mariana Islands. And then we had multiple threats this year to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. As would make sense when you're dealing with an island, you can't drive your resources down I-95 to get there in a day or two. It takes a lot of days ahead of time. And for Puerto Rico, 5 days is really when we have to start sending resources going to. So we have a very early timeline for Puerto Rico. And with 5 credible threats to Puerto Rico this year, it was a busy year for spending a lot of time at that level 2 and level 3 range for that preparedness. But all of the FEMA regions had activity this year, from Region 9 on the West Coast. We had Harold into Texas, Adalia into Florida. We had multiple systems impact the Mid-Atlantic and New England. Last thing I'd like to touch on is HURVAC. Most of you are probably familiar with it, but just in case you are not, it is kind of the bread and butter of the National Hurricane Program and the Hurricane Liaison Team. It's a web-based decision support tool. It takes the common operating picture from the National Hurricane Center and all of the National Weather Service products that are provided for tropical cyclones. And it's combined with the resources from hurricane evacuation studies in the emergency management community, and then allows decision makers to go in and take a look at the latest forecast information, and particularly the wind timing reports. We heard this morning how important timing is. HURVAC is one of those locations where emergency managers can see not only the typical time of arrival information you see from the Hurricane Center, but it also takes the wind speed probability data and then gets the time of departure information so that the emergency managers can get an idea of duration and when it'll be safe to potentially put their assets back out on the streets after the storm. It's also where we have the slosh display now. So if your emergency managers are looking at moms and meows, HURVAC is the place to do that. So those wind timing reports, the evacuation timing reports, clearance time information, looking at evacuation zones and comparing. Managers can help gauge which zones are at risk. All of that can be done in HURVAC. And we have almost 30,000 unique users to HURVAC. And during a storm like Adalia, we can have several thousand emergency managers logged in at any given time using HURVAC for their decision making. These are our contact information. Really, again, we are a contact to the emergency management community. So as any of you all are working on your various projects, if you need some input or contacts to state, local, regional, federal emergency managers, Matthew and myself, along with Vic for the West Pacific, are here to assist. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Michael. And then I believe our last speaker will be Brian McNulty, who will talk about the dynamical communication of weather risk.
Okay. All righty. Good morning, or almost afternoon. This is a big group project, and I'm only listed on there first because I got chosen to be the spokesperson here. But it's a big group of us at the University of Miami. And so we've got Sharon, Kenny, Alberto, Scott, Barbara, and then we've got Rebecca Morse and Robert Presley at NCAR, all working on this. We're working with Jessica Schauer, Pablo, Robbie, Frank. Certainly, there's a lot of those people here or online. So, the big picture of what we're looking to do is just effective visual communication of forecasts, risk, and uncertainty, including probabilistic information and hazard threat levels. That's the big picture. Some of the work we've done, the first round of projects was sponsored by the University of Miami through a program called ULink. And so we had a review article that was in BAMS. We conducted some focus groups, some eye tracking experiments in the lab. A lot of the first round of work was focused on the cone and what people understand and don't understand about that, which, as we know, there are some issues there. Then when the ULink project ended, we got a grant from NOAA, and so we're in the midst of that. We are wrapping up some of the interviews and surveys. We have, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but working on interviews and surveys with broadcast METs, emergency managers, social media analysis. So we've got a few papers out on those already. So this is kind of the big view of kind of what we're doing in here. This is kind of the roadmap, I guess, of how we want to get to where we're going. We start with generative research, which is where you ask the end users what they want, what they need, what they find confusing, what they, all that sort of thing. You're just trying to learn about what the people who you're making these things for, what they need. Then we go through, among us, we come up with a design or a few options for designs, and you go to evaluative research, where you go back to the people again and say, okay, how's this? And there we're going through asking the people in the public, broadcast METs, emergency managers, the private sector. And then you just kind of loop back and keep on improving. There's really no end to this. So to come up with some of the first round of inputs to this, we held four design charrettes, which were in-person groups about a year ago. They came up to about 33 people. One of the things we came to fairly quickly was the HTI, the Hurricane Threats and Impacts graphics. People found very easy to understand, intuitive. They liked it, so we kind of gave them a little bit of a head start with that. But we also asked them, if you have any ideas of your own, feel free to sketch them out or ask one of our people to sketch them out. So it was a wide open format, but we did give them a little bit of a head start just so that we weren't. They asked, what do you like? What do you not like about this? What's confusing to you? That sort of thing. And so that was really, I was able to participate in one or two of those, and that was very enlightening. So after that's over, then we go back amongst ourselves and kind of try to bin all of their responses and kind of then look at, okay, what do we need to spend our efforts on? Certainly these first few have been looked at a lot, and there's still a need for it. What should the colors be for the threat levels? What should those threat levels be called? How many should there be? Those are all questions we're going to be looking at. We've heard this a few times already this morning, is when do hazards start and end? Let's see, communicating some of the impacts. A lot of the people associate hurricane impacts with just the coastline. Of course, that's not true. So you want to try to get more of that conveyed. Watches and warnings came up a lot. People don't understand them at all. Timing of when things are issued and when the next update is going to be was important to people. Like, okay, I see that this was issued at 12 o'clock today. When should I expect to be able to find the next thing? That was something that came up a few times. And I believe Jessica showed a slide on this morning, but real examples of impact. So you can say that there might be a 9-foot storm surge or 110-mile-per-hour winds or whatever, but not everyone can really envision what that looks like or means because it's so far out of the range of the norm. One of the other things we're looking at is, do you have text versus icons or icons with text? That actually gets back to one of the points on the left that I skipped over, but that was the accessibility and language barriers. So if you drop some text and replace it with, say, like a storm surge icon or when people can just see what a storm surge icon kind of looks like and means. And move on here. So we have 6 cases, and this is not one of the, this isn't the things we're actually working on. This is just an example to highlight the 6 cases. They're all for Florida, going back to Hurricane Irma in 2017, and we picked on Michael, Isaias, Ada, Ian, and Nicole. We wanted kind of a range of really high impact things and not so high impact things, and on different parts of the state. So in a few of these examples, it's just maybe it skims a little bit of the state, and other parts it's the whole state. This is kind of where we're at right now with it. We're going to do 3 exploratory studies. The first one is just the how many threat levels there are and what they're called and all that. That is complete, and we're going through it. 2 is about to go out any moment, basically, and 3 is in the near future. We're about ready to go out with that. And then the main experiment, once we get the feedback from all of those, we'll take those into account, create the inputs for the main experiment, and that'll be to ask people, what do you get from this? And then be able to find out, do they actually get the right answers when you're asking them a question about it? And these 3 minutes. Oh, perfect. Thanks. So just for example, in this first exploratory study, we had 360 respondents for that, both on the coast and inland. They all had prior hurricane experience. We have 20 interviews with broadcast METs and emergency managers, 10 of each. That's complete, and we're going through that. Those were all done online. And next steps, like I said, we have to wrap up those the 3 exploratory studies, come up with the prototype graphics that'll go into the main experiment. Then we come up with design guidelines, and the idea is that this does not just apply to hurricanes. This can be applied to other sorts of weather events. We're just using a hurricane as the first type of event. One of the things we plan on doing, or would like to do in the future, is kind of take the hurricane example, but put all the emphasis on the post-landfall time frame. How to keep communication going for things when we call them post-tropical, which no one knows what that means, and remnant. Like these, all of a sudden it's just like, the end. But it's not the end, as you know. There's plenty of examples where there's still very significant impacts for days. And so, how to keep people tuned into that and aware of those ongoing threats. So that's where we're headed in the future. So, all right, thank you.
So I think that ends all the talks, and I think we'll open it up for discussion in the room. Jamie's going to start us off, I think.
Yeah, I get the privileges as chair. So Sandra, you weren't here to see sort of the reason for the meeting, which is to set the sort of strategic plan for the next 5 to 10 years for what we will work on as a community within NOAA. As an emergency manager, what would you say is your biggest ask, your biggest need, your biggest gap? If you could wave a magic wand and get one thing, what would it be?
I love these kind of questions. So the rapid intensification and the ability didn't get that high. But for us, Southwest Florida, particularly when you have these very vulnerable storm surge risk areas, 2 feet of water is roughly a mile further inland. So our area that we evacuated was approximately 500,000 people. So thankfully we had already called for an evacuation that, covered for most of that intensification. But, when we see storms like Acapulco, we're going from tropical storm to Cat 5 in a very short amount of time. That would be very bad for a coastal area that is so densely populated like Southwest Florida. So if you could wave your magic wand and let us know any earlier that we're expecting this rapid intensification, that would certainly make our lives a lot easier. And even having the probabilistic storm surge a little bit earlier would be massively helpful. Yep.
What is the actual time frame you want for RI?
Yeah, ideally. So if we had, yeah, I mean, if we, well, rapid intensification, I know that's a little tricky, right? But even if we had, you know, right now we're getting probabilistic storm surge-ish to 72. Okay, so that's helpful. Getting it 72 hours is helpful. I know that Adalia, you guys did get it out fairly early. So yeah, right around that time frame, you know, because 72 hours, 48 hours even, we can still move people within that amount of time frame. Once you get much below 48 and you're getting closer to a day, day and a half. Say that again?
Otis didn't exist before 72 hours.
Well, exactly, right. Well, you said to ask what I wanted for, so that's what I would like.
This is a question for the Royal Caribbean meteorologist. Would you like to see the cone shrink or expand based on the uncertainty in the track forecast?
Craig, you can just come up to here if you want.
So I didn't really use the cone with the captains. I deal directly with the captains, and I started off with them being very deterministic, and they were saying, you know, the Euro shows this, or the GFS shows this. And by the time I worked with them a little bit, they were sending me pictures of the ensemble saying, you know, most of the strong solutions are on the right. And I'm like, Captain, what do you want to do? Because I don't have anything to contribute. You're making the forecast now. And that's kind of the goal, is to bring them up where they can really make the decisions. And I just say, good job. So the cone, of course, will open a can of worms with me because the cone is a validation tool from the previous 5 years skill, right, of 2/3 of the time of the center point, right? So what I use is a wind speed probability that you saw in that graphic there, of a threshold that kind of sweeps out the area of 2/3 of the time of where the wind speed probability will exceed tropical storm conditions. So you'll have tropical storm conditions. And, you know, one more thing. There was the old Mariner rule that I'm trying to get the captains off of, the 1, 2, 3, that at 72 hours or 300 miles from the center, which now thankfully has been updated to just stay out of the tropical storm conditions, the threat. So it saves, I mean, last year our ships spent 27 ships, 1.4 billion in fuel alone. So any 5% of that is a lot of money. So, you know, just making better meteorological guidance and decisions saves a lot of money.
A lot of carbon put in
And a
the
lot
air.
of carbon.
Pablo, did you want to say anything about WSP since you're going to be talking about it tomorrow?
I say wait till tomorrow. That's how you bring people back. Well,
Well,
But anyhow-
feel free to just do a plug for yourself. That's fine.
We are working, and mostly Mark is the brain right here. We're working with them on what we call the next generation WSP model, which is going to be substantially different from the legacy, especially for land areas. So I think that's enough of a teaser for everybody. But certainly, I'm not going to be here, but Wallace going to present it for us. So if you were not planning to be here tomorrow, you're going to miss a really good talk. Anyhow.
And I would add that we are trying to include more ensemble information into what goes into the wind speed probabilities. I think maybe don't bother with the cone. I think you want to address the hazard, like Craig said. But that's actually a big challenge for this group, is how do we get a lot of information from ensembles and then also have the Hurricane Center forecast and get those two consistent. And so that is really a big challenge, but we are developing a couple of ways of doing that. And Jim actually did some of the early work on that. That's still used right now. We still use your gypsy parameter. At least there's a little bit of dynamical uncertainty in the track, But I think we can do a lot more than that, but it is kind of a challenge to maintain the consistency.
I think we had a question online, Castle.
Yeah, I'm going to copy Jamie's question and send it over to Craig, because you obviously have different decision-making needs. So if you had a magic wand, is there any type of data, information, products that would be beneficial to you in making those decisions?
Run, Frank, run.
So there's a lot of data out there. My problem is getting it in a presentable format. And so I've had to literally build some of the tools to extract some of the model data and present it. I think that would be my thing, is more of visualization tools as opposed to the data itself. I love the data if I could just get what I need from it.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So thinking about our plans for the future, multi-model, single model ensembles, what parameters should we be looking to pull out to help with these product developments? Any suggestions, multi-model, single model, what different variables do you need?
I think before you make that decision, you should ask the downstream derivatives, what are the requirements? Right. So we would need to go through and design a next generation set of products that were more probabilistic based. Many of them already are. And then from that, determine what the physical science or modeling requirements to drive that, so it's statistically reliable.
So if we were, I mean, the second goal in the strategic plan, which you and Cody helped draft our response to that strategy, dealing with uncertainty. You mentioned uncertainty in location. We already have that. Uncertainty and intensity. RMW, R34, and that was driven by the surge products. I would ask Mark maybe, what about rainfall, gusts, those type of things? What could we pull out of, what should we be thinking of mining? We already have the ensembles, but what should we be mining that would help improve your products?
I think what's needed, precip is kind of a separate thing, also needs to be done probabilistically, but what really we need is the two-dimensional surface wind field, and that drives everything else. We need an accurate representation of that and its uncertainty. I mean, and then that drives the surge, we need a gust component for that for inland. So it's sustained wind and gusts at the surface.
You use that to anchor both your probabilistic hazard ensembles. So that's the modeling part. There's at least some body of evidence that's suggesting that it's an important component in communicating. You know, so Sandra talked about how people just couldn't envision that this could happen. And we wonder why that is because we put 10 lines on a map and ask them to pick which one. We need to have them see the storm and see how big it is and you know, envision it. And so this two-dimensional wind field might be an important communication tool above and beyond just the obvious benefits from the modeling side.
Jamie, could you take real quick a look at the comment from Aaron Pratt on the chat? I think it actually ties into a lot of what you're saying.
Yeah, so I mean, and I'm not going to touch the third rail of hurricanes, aka the cone. But those who are rushing to redesign the cone, we need to pause and really think about, is it the cone or are we trying to design the next generation way that's more hazard forward? Because if you mess with the cone, it sucks the oxygen out of the room and it may temporarily degrade public understanding if you start messing around with it. So we have to be careful and think about what is the best way to do it so that we're moving forward in a systematic. So great question, Aaron.
I just wanted to add, when it comes to decision support, before the Hurricane Center, I worked 28 WFO, delivering decision support at the local level. And talking about data mining, as we keep building this ensemble, expanding capability, the agency right now is involving effort, visualization tool, data mining tool that allow us to do clustering analysis of all this ensemble data and now derive probabilistic information for specific thresholds that are decision-making threshold for our partners. Some of you in the weather service here know the DESI. If some of you have heard of that, it's a very popular visualization tool weather service investing in right now. And what it allows us to do is dynamically on the fly from this full array of different ensemble system and data mine that, do clustering analysis and extract, okay, what is the probability that this is gonna happen, right? That now enable decision support meteorologists out there to on the fly address questions that speak very specifically to the decision-making threshold a partner has in mind. So it goes beyond just modeling. It's how do you develop effective visualization analysis tool that can data mine all that database coming out from the ensemble system to target decisions, decision making.
Well, just to answer your question about multi-model and single model ensembles, there's no question the multi-model ensembles are better. So it's good to see now HAFS is going to have an ensemble, or it already does, and COAMPS has one. So on those scales, and if there's any other ones out there, I mean, like the European Center, the GFS, NCEP has an ensemble, European Center does, UK Met has one. If you take a grand ensemble of all their members, I think it's a little over 100 or something like that, you'll get better results than each of the individual ones. So there's really a single model. You can't put all your eggs in one basket if you're talking about ensembles. You're going to get a benefit of having some more or less independent ensembles to produce the total result.
So you're saying the spread would be better, more realistic, give you more dynamic.
Yeah, just to add to this conversation about visualization that Rob was talking about, and I think Brian hit on it a bit in your presentation, but, we were hearing all kinds of things after the fact. In Lee County, somebody shared that they thought 15 feet of storm surge meant it was going to go 15 feet from the coastline in, right? And people just aren't understanding, as much as we talk about it, every chance we get when we get in front of the public, we try to get them to understand. You see these huge evacuation zones. That means there is a storm out there, that there is potential that water can reach you from the storm. We try to break it down as simple as possible. Even from a simple, we are evacuating you because we think water can reach your house. Like they're just not reaching that. And we're not talking uneducated people. Yeah, we're talking about first responders. We're talking about, there was a in the storm surge. These are very well-educated people. My own dermatologist afterwards, she didn't close her practice, and we're talking to her, well, you live in a zone A, like, why wouldn't you close? And she's like, well, we had appointments we wanted to get, we got people out a couple hours early, and they just aren't getting it. Now, hopefully, at least in Lee County, they get it, at least for a little while. And people are going to come and go, pass away, new generations, and hopefully we aren't going to have a storm like that in our area for a while. But just having that ability when that particular storm comes to visualize and show people, like computer-generated model, this is the storm surge and the probability of it coming to this length into the land and along the river. We have a huge river that cuts the county in half. It wasn't just on the coastline, it was all up along the river that storm surge got pushed. And so people need to really see it to get it, because our words aren't working. So anything you guys can do to help with that would be greatly appreciated.
That brings up a question to Castle. Castle, wasn't one of the recommendations about scenarios? Can you jog my memory? I vaguely remember that.
Yes. So one of the big takeaways was that partners wanted more modeling information specifically from NOAA. they said that they wanted more information about scenarios, and that they typically go out and they get that information from other people and from other sources, but they would really appreciate if there was more information being officially communicated about like the modeling aspects. And so they kind of recommended having some sort of modeling product or something that would be more upfront and kind of overt about the different types of scenarios that were possible.
Yeah, so my recollection though was, given the cone or some probabilistic information, they wanted to know, well, what would happen if it was faster or slower or right or left? Wasn't that the issue?
That was part of it. So it was kind of scenario based of like, what are the different, as you mentioned, like if it goes left, what would it do? What time would things get here? That type of thing, by providing some of these almost like worst case, best case scenario, but more of location based scenarios.
Jason.
So maybe this is a comment / question to Lee County, but I think it's generally more applicable. What I'm hearing is that people need to see things, right? So from a county level, anywhere, why not go and mark certain points of infrastructure, right? That light pole there, that overpass. If we have a 5-foot storm surge, this is where it's getting to. If we have a 10-foot, this is where it's going to. That gives people kind of a point of reference. I know that's a big ask, that's a big task, right? But I'm just trying to, how do we translate the numbers we're putting out to something that people can relate to on the street level?
I can tell you why the real estate industry pushes back severely. We've been trying that for 10 years, and I got so frustrated I put one of them in the front yard of the Hurricane Center. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
As a way to say that we will endorse any community that will proceed down that path. And several of them have come to us asking for it. Now I have to figure out how to build them because they're expensive to build. But it's the pushback from the real estate community.
Yeah.
These folks are very politically strong.
Yeah, and it does. It impacts your economic development of your community. That's ultimately what it comes down to. I mean, as an emergency manager, 100% I'm with you. And actually in Lee County, they did start marking all of the stop signs, some of the road signs with at least the letter of the zone, so people were familiar. Charlotte County also did that similarly. But I love the poll that you guys have at the National Hurricane Center. I'm fighting hard to get one in Lee County. I think that visualization is great, but Jamie's absolutely right. People don't like to move to an area. They're about to move to an area. They're about to spend a lot of money on a house. And you start thinking about, there could be more storm surge than my house is, Now, if they're paying attention to history, they're going to be able to see that, at least in Lee County, but a lot of these other areas, I think that you're going to run into a lot of opposition. Politics. They sure do. Because,
So just a question about, are there any tabletop exercises available that could be used from the HFIP and that we can use? Okay.
And you do all your training, right? Tabletop exercises, training type thing. I'll let him go and then you.
Yes, obviously we're very involved with lots of training. Each spring in January and February, we do 3 week-long courses with emergency managers from around the country. So Sandra was at the course last year, but we'll have Gulf Coast, Southeast, Northeast. We'll have state and local decision makers, the people who are hopefully very involved in making evacuation zones and other operational decisions, come to the Hurricane Center, get some hurricane forecasting 101. But there's also a large part of understanding hurricane evacuation studies. How do you build out your evacuation zones? And then at the end of the week, doing an actual tabletop exercise where we have a storm threatening your community. This is your jurisdiction. These are your evacuation zones. These are your clearance times. These are the storm surge forecasts, and to help them make sure they're making their decisions appropriately at the right time using the tools inside of HERVAC. So then, yes, exactly. HERVAC is the place that all those are combined then to make that decision. It has had a lot of work, even just this year, with multiple additions to it. With the recent peak storm surge graphics are now inside of HERVAC. New point of interest. It's kind of like a little basic GIS now where emergency managers can save their points of interest and see their wind timing reports. Continually being upgraded.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to have to end the session now because we've got to do the lunch break. We will be back at 1:45 with our afternoon sessions. Thank you very much. Oh, and for anyone in the room that parked in the lot, other than your swim in, could you also please bring the parking ticket so we can get a count to the front desk? Just leave it on the table up here. And I'm assuming they'll do the same thing they've done the past couple of days where they'll just either open the gate when we dismiss or just buzz and say you're with HFIP. Thank you.